Hey guys, tonight we travel across the vast steppe, where the grass sways like whispers from restless ancestors and the stars blink above an empire afraid to sleep. You are bundled inside a felt-lined yurt that smells faintly of scorched lamb fat and incense, surrounded by silk pillows and the hum of distant horses. Outside, the Mongol night stretches wide, a velvet nothing broken only by the flicker of noble campfires and the slow, uneasy silence creeping in. It's the late 1340s and rumors swirl like smoke around your head. A sickness has begun to slither west, striking port cities like thunderbolts and leaving priests, merchants, even royalty in twisted heaps. Mongol scouts report death riding through wind gusts and river valleys. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, comment your location and local time so I know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit beneath a canopy woven with blue and gold dragons, licking fire-crisped ribs while noble cousins argue over plague rumors like merchants haggling for horse meat. They say it started with the rats, not the noble, fluffy field rats you've seen scurry between hay bundles, but the port rats, fat with greasy fur and eyes black as tree resin. These rats apparently carry bad luck, swarming grain ships with fleas that burst into boils. The nobles scoff, of course. We are not Italian, they joke. Mongols don't die from fleas. We crush them in our boots. But someone coughs a wet, fruit rot sound and silence creeps over the camp. Suddenly, ribs don't taste so good. The older lords quietly shift away from the fire and summon their shaman, who shows up with goat horns and a clay bowl of fermented mare's milk. He throws salt into the flames and mutters a chant that smells suspiciously like fear. Historians still argue whether the initial Mongol reports were exaggerated. Did the steppe elites panic early, or did they receive clearer warnings from Persian traders than the Europeans ever did? What's certain is this: Mongol nobles, powerful as they were, could feel the wind changing. The plague had not yet galloped into their camp, but the hooves were thunderous in the distance. You trudge over to the edge of the camp, where guards talk of dead boats in the Caspian and vomit cities where no one walks by day. One man claims his cousin was found singing hymns naked in a tree before collapsing mid-verse. Another insists his family in Karakoram burns their carpets every sunset, though nobody can explain why. At night, the campfire becomes a confessional. People begin admitting to strange dreams: snakes eating clouds, horses drowning in sand, children walking backward through snow. A noblewoman says her bathwater turned green, though her maid insists it was the dye from her robe. Quirky and grim tales bounce around the flames like sparks. One boy swears he saw a wolf wearing a crown near the river. You're not sure whether to laugh or move closer to the guards. By dawn, the camp packs up fast. Rugs rolled, goats slapped into motion, tents folded like origami. Mongols never linger anyway, but this rush feels different. The nobles order their yurts placed farther apart, just enough to minimize breathing each other's dust. You ride past one elder holding a silver ladle to his grandson's lips, eyes tight, as if praying through his eyebrows. A court official mutters about reassigning astrologers who clearly read the wrong moon. These jokes used to kill at banquets, now they fizzle into awkward throat clears. As you ride onward, one noble whispers about sealing a valley with bricks and incense. Another claims he's buying 100 barrels of garlic, convinced it wards off bad air. Scholars later debate whether garlic was truly used like this, but the purchases were real. A merchant called Urkatai even started sketching plague masks, though Mongols preferred amulets over costumes. You cross paths with one lord distributing fire-blessed eagle feathers. They're beautiful, sure, but the way he crams them into everyone's saddlebags feels more frantic than sacred. Later that evening, the stars bloom above you like frost flakes, and for a few hours, everything feels quiet. Nobles hum lullabies, children chase each other with carved rabbits, and the air fills with roasting mutton and cedar smoke. Still, nobody eats very much. You overhear a general asking if boiling silver coins could purify camp water. It's nonsense, obviously, but he's boiling them anyway. The Black Death hasn't arrived yet. But it's already here in every whispered rumor and fire-lit glance. And so you drift off to sleep, wrapped in layers, under skies that used to seem permanent. You ride beneath clouds that look like bruises stretched over the sky, hooves pounding against soil warmed by nervous sun. The air carries layers of sweat, horse, human, and something sour like boiled leather, and you're tucked behind a cluster of nobles who still insist on travel robes embroidered with peacocks and phoenixes, as if stitching legends into your sleeves could make you immune. Courier riders flash past like arrows, kicking up dust and paranoia. One throws a rolled scroll into your lap without stopping, the seal is cracked and the ink still wet. It reads like gossip but tastes like doom. Karakoram is quiet, one monastery sealed off, caravans delayed. No one wants to touch the silver coins. Another courier gallops past, face wrapped in a dyed scarf, swinging what he calls a plague whip made of braided yak hair and fox teeth. Apparently, it keeps evil spirits 6 horse lengths away, though historians still argue whether such charms had any basis or were simply status symbols for spooked aristocrats. The nobles listen to these reports half-heartedly, heads tilted like falcons squinting toward danger they refuse to name. Still, they ride faster. You pass a boy clutching a bouquet of dried flowers said to repel rot, one lord snorts, another pockets a sprig for later. You overhear 2 cousins debating whether wind can carry sickness. They reference the bad air theory traded from Italian sailors and Chinese pamphlets, scoffing and half-believing at once. Superstition spreads faster than disease here. Mongol households tie red string around cooking pots, hang thorny sticks above sleeping mats, and boil onions they don't plan to eat. The camp even begins to smell different, pungent, layered, riddled with strange burnt notes. A woman waves incense smoke toward you in passing, mumbling about cleansing the riding path. You nod, because not nodding feels rude. Someone suggests that horses' sweat can detect plague if it smells sweet. Beware. You try not to sniff your mare but notice she's panting heavier than usual. By dusk, news reaches the nobles of a city gate nailed shut with copper rods, plague inside, no exit. A few riders claim they saw dogs eating candles from abandoned shrines. The nobles pretend to discuss land taxes while slipping garlic cloves into their pockets. Your saddlebag now holds a cracked amber amulet, a wrinkled prayer scroll, and 2 dried mushrooms said to whisper when danger nears. You haven't heard anything yet, but you keep checking. Some aristocrats stop shaving their eyebrows, convinced bare brows invite death. Others start reciting blessing chants backwards while bathing. A little girl asks if she should drink horse urine like her uncle does now for spiritual immunity. You don't have an answer, and neither does the maid who accidentally hands her wine instead. Later, one noble gifts you a talisman made from braided yak tail, dried plum seeds, and blue silk. Hang this by your bed, she says. It keeps away dreams of ash. Historians note that even step physicians promoted dream hygiene as if nightmares could coax illness into the lungs. You keep the talisman tucked in your coat. As the night swells, riders whisper about how quickly it moves. Cities that laughed on Monday had empty wells by Wednesday. Your cook says onions scream when stabbed if plague is near. You watch her slice 3, they stay silent. A scholar scribbles fever maps in chalk, tracking rumors like smoke trails. His robes smell of mint and mustard seeds. You ask if he's worried. About death? He shrugs. No. About idiots thinking mint cures it? Absolutely. And still, Someone's uncle now chews mint between songs. You pass a caravan of furs stamped with sigils said to repel infection. A merchant refuses to touch them unless wearing gloves soaked in vinegar. His mule wears matching gloves. You almost respect it. One noble declares that songs about moonlight must not be sung during travel now. Another blames the plague on an eclipse they watched last autumn while drunk. You think back, maybe they're right. Maybe everything's connected. Superstition wraps around you like wool, itchy and hot but hard to discard. Somewhere behind your group, a boy coughs once, twice, soft. No one speaks, but several riders veer left without explanation. The rest pretend not to hear. You chew on dry fruit and whisper a mantra you've only ever used during storms. The wind answers with silence. You ride into a camp where the air is heavy with incense and arguments, nobles slinging words like arrows aimed at a sickness they can't name. The Khan himself hasn't arrived, but his presence looms through silken banners and anxious glances. Court astrologers unfold star charts the size of wagon covers, pointing to constellations that supposedly blink with illness. You overhear a debate about whether Mars is too red this season. One old scholar swears it means war, another insists it's the color of infected lungs. The physicians, real ones and those who just own expensive herbs, arrive with baskets of dried snakes and deer antlers, claiming they've deciphered the hidden cause of the plague through mold patterns. One insists that wind and stars together amplify disease, and nobles nod like this explains everything. Historians still argue whether Mongol courts truly believed plague had cosmic origins or simply played along to maintain ritual order, but in this moment, nobody dares contradict the astrologers. The Khan's advisors recommend that all camps orient their doors away from the eastern wind and that drinking water be collected only under moonlight. You're handed a leather pouch of moon-drawn water. It tastes like regret and smells faintly of pine. You pretend to savor it while a nearby noble blesses his boots with crushed mint leaves. Superstition becomes daily chore now. Yurts are rearranged to avoid shadow overlap, a concept you never understood, but one elder claims it prevents nightmares turning physical. A young noble tears his robe in ritual mourning, though no one has died in camp, just in case pre-grief protects his lungs. You ask if that's an actual belief. He shrugs and says, maybe. But dying unprepared is worse. Later, a messenger presents the Khan's new decree: all traveling nobles must carry copper amulets dipped in mare's blood, ideally blessed by someone born during a thunderstorm. You glance at your driver. He was born in spring sunshine, and so offers his cousin's blessing instead. Mongol records show a spike in talisman creation around this time, some forged into belt buckles shaped like birds or wolves. You receive one carved like a turtle and told it deflects underground spirits. Scholars still debate what that even means. The Khan, far from your caravan, reportedly consults dream interpreters nightly. Someone claims he ordered a wall built of salt to keep out evil air. It's probably a joke. But if it's real, you kind of wish you could see it. Inside one yurt, nobles argue about migration patterns. Should they head toward the mountains or circle back to the winter encampment? One woman insists staying near birch trees cures despair. Another votes for proximity to frozen lakes because ghosts avoid cold. You don't challenge this logic. You pass a group of lords gathered around a deer skull painted with turquoise ink, asking it questions as if it might answer. It doesn't, but the silence is treated as profound. A cook prepares soup from 12 ingredients, none of which make sense together, but it's declared healing if eaten while facing north. You try a spoonful. It tastes mostly like hot dirt. Still, a nearby general eats 5 bowls in succession and declares himself untouchable. You're unsure whether he's right or just too full to fall ill. As twilight settles, one noble burns his family scrolls, saying too many names invites jealousy from the afterlife. You remember a story you heard 3 nights ago. about a ghost who visited a tent with matching names and stole the blankets. You sleep cold that night, wondering if your own name is too common. You're jolted awake by the sound of creaking wheels and shouting in two dialects, a cacophony of wood, hoofbeats, and noble indignation as the caravan of mobile palaces jerks into motion. Yurts aren't merely tents here, they're expressions of status and superstition, bursting with feather-stuffed cushions, gold thread curtains, and the smell of boiling marrow and rosewater. Nobles insist on leaving in layers, wearing ceremonial robes as they flee, because even panic must look dignified. Horses strain under the weight of lacquered chests filled with incense bundles, books of genealogy, and jars of marmot grease said to cure everything but heartbreak. You sit beside a cart where a noblewoman argues with her steward about the ideal feng shui of a portable bedroom. The pillow must face west so dreams drift away. She yells. You'd roll your eyes, but she outranks you. Historians still debate whether Mongol nobles truly believed changing geography could outrun sickness or if it was a convenient excuse for avoiding stagnant duty. Either way, the caravan moves like a glittering river through an anxious landscape. One lord rides ahead, waving a stick with hanging silver bells meant to chase off plague spirits hiding in tall grass. You glance left and see two guards burning sticks of plum bark as they walk. Someone throws salt in a circle every time the caravan rests. An elder swears that rats won't cross salt lines, they're too proud, apparently. You can't verify this, but you still sprinkle some behind your horse. At night, your temporary lodging sparkles with oil lamps shaped like foxes and vultures. One noble insists these animals never die of plague, though no one cites evidence. Still, the fox lamp looks cool. You light it. Supper is fermented turnips and dried camel meat, survival cuisine dressed up as delicacy. A noble plucks a lyre and sings a song about horses running toward stars. You ask if it's cheerful. It's a funeral song, he whispers. You stop asking. A doctor arrives on a donkey covered in red ribbons. He sets up a foldable clinic under a willow tree and diagnoses passers-by based on eyebrow twitch speed. Apparently, slow twitch means your spirit is heavy. You're told to eat sunflower petals soaked in goat milk. It tastes awful, but your eyebrows feel lighter. By moonrise, yurts shift again. Some nobles demand tents near trees, others away from them. One elder sees a shadow he doesn't like and immediately relocates his entire camp 20 paces north. Mongol nobles value mobility not just as strategy, but as psychological salve. Keep moving, keep breathing, maybe outrun despair. Some believe sickness comes when you stop. That night, a child recites a poem about wind being jealous. Someone replies, "That's why it steals voices." You nod and promise not to sing tomorrow. The next day, the caravan crosses a shallow river where some nobles bathe their horses, murmuring chants about cleansing hooves. You overhear two aristocrats debating whether camels are less plague-prone than horses. One swears his camel hasn't sneezed once. The other argues that sneezing means strength. You're beginning to suspect no one has any idea what's going on. Still, they ride, wash, chant, and relocate their yurts like chess pieces mid-game. You pass a messenger biting into a raw onion while reciting family names, his version of spiritual armor. Another noble places mirrors outside his tent to confuse death. You check your reflection, still you, still here. By dusk, the moving palaces halt again. New configurations. New prayers. New dinner rituals. The plague hasn't caught up. But every squeaky wheel and aching hoof feels like a countdown. You gallop past rows of traders bundled in fur that used to be elegant but now feels like danger wrapped in velvet. Merchants from across the Silk Road gather near the edge of the camp, hawking wares with desperate smiles that don't quite reach their eyes. One flaunts a cloak made of ermine, boasting its softness and protection from cold spirits, but then quietly mutters he won't wear it himself. You dismount beside a cart dripping with fox pelts, and for a moment you forget the plague exists until a noble screams because his new lynx scarf made him itchy. It's fleas. Someone gasps. Panic explodes like spilled ink. Guards grab torches and threaten to burn half the market. You watch in confused terror as fur traders plead for mercy, swearing their goods were boiled, salted, and smoked. One even shakes a certificate written in 3 languages guaranteeing his otter cloaks were spirit cleansed. Historians still argue whether animal-based trade helped spread the Black Death across Eurasia or simply offered a scapegoat for frightened aristocrats, but in this moment, the mood turns from lavish to lethal. Several nobles toss their mink-lined boots into the fire, gagging from imagined infestations. You feel your own collar itch and begin to sweat. A shaman walks through the chaos waving herbs and shouting curses at fleas, real or imagined. Behind him, a wealthy widow sits calmly, sipping horse milk tea, explaining that the true danger isn't the furs but the foreign dyes that trap spirits. You sneak a glance at your own robe's deep green hem and feel suddenly cursed. The camp rearranges again. Fur traders are relocated beyond the main perimeter, forced to display wares from carts wrapped in smoke-drenched canvas. Mongol nobles begin to wear leather layered over thin silk and chant while dressing, just in case. One prince insists that his favorite squirrel-lined robe was a gift from an immortal river spirit and thus cannot be infected. You watch him eat boiled fish beside a burning squirrel effigy. It's unclear if he believes his own story. Someone starts selling clean fur charms, small pouches filled with shaved hair and dried berries. You're handed one free with a slab of yak jerky. A merchant ties 3 to his own beard and dares death to disagree. Riders report rumors from the east, entire towns sealed off after a merchant arrived with infected pelts. One tale says a furrier coughed so violently his cart shook apart. Another claims a trader disguised himself as a monk to flee quarantine and was later found mumbling Latin at goats. You don't ask why goats. At camp, nobles begin to request fabric from local sources untouched by ships, unsullied by river rats. A tailor sets up a yurt where garments are sewn from moss fibers and sheep wool blessed hourly. You overhear someone say moss can trap evil breath. The fashion trends shift overnight from silk and fur to coarse wool and dull cotton. Robes lose their patterns, jewelry is sealed in wax, and hair is braided around cloves to confuse the illness. You watch a noble decorate her tent entrance with dried hedgehog skins, protective spikes, she says. Her cousin adds 6 turtle shells, just to be safe. A physician arrives with diagrams of lice clusters and flea habitats drawn in goat blood and pollen, half scientific, half performance art. You nod as if it makes sense. A general offers boiled beetle broth to anyone wearing fur within the last month, claiming it detoxifies the blood. You drink half a cup out of politeness and spend the next hour trying not to vomit. As the sun dips below hills of whispering grass, the fires crackle around the outer camp, turning former luxuries into eerie reminders. What once symbolized prestige now smolders in forgettable ash. The plague hasn't yet bitten, but your traveling cloak now smells like fear. You wake to the pungent scent of smoldering bone, specifically sheep, judging from the size of the fragments clinking together in the ceremonial bowl being passed around by a shaman who smells of burnt pine and pepper oil. He wears feathers in his hair and mutters rhythmic phrases that sound like poems written by thunder. You watch nobles take turns waving the smoky bowl around their heads, allowing the fumes to curl into their robes, nostrils, and nerves. Apparently, the smoke isn't just perfume, it's protection. Shamans say burning bones cleanses not only the air but also thoughts, dreams, and stray spirits that might whisper sickness into the lungs. The process makes your eyes sting and your throat itch, but refusing the smoke is considered unwise. You catch a noble pouring milk on the fire to calm the flames, a gesture meant to keep the spirits from getting agitated and turning plagueful. Nearby, flocks of sheep graze in awkward silence as if sensing their future involves more combustion than cuddling. Mongol herds are sacred, after all, especially during uncertain times, when even a sheep's sneeze might mean doom. A lord scratches his chin and declares, "Our sheep are cleaner than any city physician," which earns nods from those within earshot. Historians still argue whether bone burning served any actual medical purpose or simply offered psychological relief, but in the flickering firelight, everyone seems committed. You notice young nobles rubbing ash onto their forearms and whispering prayers about resilience and featherless flight. Someone recites a poem about sheep floating into the afterlife on clouds that smell like garlic. You don't ask for clarification. A healer strolls through camp offering sheep fat salve enhanced with starlight. He doesn't explain how starlight was harvested, but his skin glows, so you smear some on your neck just to be safe. Herds are moved closer to tents now, fenced in loosely with ropes blessed by traveling monks. It's said that proximity to animals preserves spirit warmth, though you doubt the animals feel particularly honored. One noble hangs hoof-shaped charms from tree branches to guide wandering spirits away. Another insists sheep bleat differently when plague is near and begins recording bleats on scrolls tied to his belt. You read one and it just says sorta whiny. Still, precautions stack like saddle blankets. A cook refuses to use garlic unless it's been blessed with bone smoke. Your dinner tastes like scorched onions and mild dread. A whisper spreads that someone's goat tried to eat the plague ward banner. The goat was promptly re-blessed. You find this comforting and vaguely ridiculous. Later, a noble constructs a wind tunnel using old carpets and incense burners, claiming it redirects angry spirits. You peek inside and see a hawk feather nailed to the wall like a compass. If it flutters, the plague is watching, he says solemnly. It doesn't flutter. You're relieved. That night, the fires roar higher than usual and you lie in your tent watching the shadow play dance across woolen walls. Someone tells a story about a sheep that dreamt of flying and woke up healed. You ask if flying is required. Only metaphorically, he replies. You mentally cancel your wing construction plans. The sky above is clear but filled with the faint smells of smoke, herbs, and scorched mutton. You breathe in and out, slowly, hoping that somewhere in the haze, something holy is listening. You ride at a slower pace now, not because the horses are tired but because the nobles have begun burying the dead in secret. It's not that bodies are forbidden, it's that public mourning attracts the wrong kind of attention. Spirits get jealous, it said, especially if grief is loud. So, instead of processions or chants, you watch nobles sneak away at dusk, leading carts draped in rugs and silence. The graves are shallow and fast, dug beneath the hooves of restless horses who stamp the earth like ceremonial dancers. One noble insists the weight of hoofbeats seals the soul to the underworld. Another adds a dead cricket to each grave so the body doesn't get bored. You don't question it. Historians still argue whether Mongols practiced quiet burials during plague times out of fear or tradition, but the speed and subtlety speak volumes. You help carry a wrapped body, lighter than expected, and place it beneath an elder tree while someone pours sand across the cloth in spirals. No names are said aloud. Names are fragile now. A scribe writes poems instead of epitaphs. One simply reads, "The wind knows her better than we did." At camp, guards set up watch points not just for bandits but for wandering spirits. Bowstrings are blessed. Arrows tipped with salt. It's unclear whether they expect ghosts to be pierced or redirected. You sleep with your bow tucked close, just in case someone unlives nearby. That night, nobles argue softly about burial methods. One favors hanging bodies in trees so spirits rise faster. Another scoffs and says buried bones bloom better. A young boy asks if souls can get tangled in roots. No one answers. You overhear someone muttering about hiding death from heaven. It's cryptic but poetic. A noble couple builds a memorial of stacked beetle shells instead of stones, claiming bugs are closer to change. You nod politely, though the pile crunches unsettlingly whenever the wind shifts. A shaman begins offering night burial blessings, whispered in sequences meant to confuse listening spirits. You pay him 3 salted fish and receive a chant you're told to repeat silently before sleep. It sounds like sneezing backwards. You try once and feel your nose twitch. Graves are marked with feathers or buttons or ash, rarely names. Even jewelry is removed now, tucked in bags and hidden between tent seams. It's said that ornate death invites ornate disease. One noble burns his medals, explaining they earned sickness with pride. You see a guard slice off a braid before burying his cousin, wrapping the hair around a deer antler and planting it at the grave's foot. It's oddly beautiful. Nearby, a family presses their palms into wet clay, then stack the prints in layers like a totem. You ask why. So we stay layered, even apart, the elder says. You feel a strange lump in your throat that isn't sickness. Some riders refuse to bury anything, claiming the earth is tired. One lord builds a fire instead and lets it whisper the name of the deceased into smoke. You stand close and watch the flame curve like it's bowing. Later, someone leaves food atop a burial mound, a bowl of rice and a boiled mushroom. It's unclear whether it's meant for the spirit or a hungry rat. Either way, it's gone by morning. You whisper a goodbye to a grave marked only by a folded blanket. No ceremony, no trumpet, just the quiet rustle of horses as they move past like mourners in motion. You receive a rolled scroll from a breathless rider, his gloves soaked in vinegar, his eyebrows shaved into protective symbols that shimmer with sweat. The scroll is stiff with wax, but inside is a dispatch from the steppe frontier, dated 2 days ago, though you can't help feeling the events happened years ago. It reads like a bad dream scribbled in panic: 5 villages gone without warning, their gates still swinging in the breeze, cooking fires cold, livestock missing or meandering through empty market squares. The messenger refuses to stay in camp, insists he ride ahead to outrun memory, a phrase you repeat to yourself with every hoofbeat. You ride beside a noble who asks if silence is contagious. No one answers. Later, one elder offers an explanation: the land swallowed them. It was hungry. Historians still argue whether these disappearances were caused by mass evacuation, unexpected illness, or spiritual flight, but no matter how it happened, the absence weighs heavier than corpses. You pass an abandoned village just after dusk. The fences are intact, the windows open, and a single shoe sits in the middle of the street like an orphaned command. The nobles refuse to enter. Instead, someone throws salt toward the gate and you move on. Tales trickle back from riders: a priest found preaching to nobody, a bakery still warm with no bakers in sight, a herd of pigs following a cart full of skulls. You wonder how much of it is real, and how much became real just by being told. One traveler tells you about a village where only birds remained, and every rooftop had an arrow stuck in the thatch. Warning from the sky, she says, and you nod because denial feels foolish now. Some nobles begin collecting small trinkets: spoons, buttons, scraps of cloth as proof people once lived in these places. One man claims he heard laughter in an empty yurt and began weeping uncontrollably for a full hour. Another reports a table still set for dinner, soup untouched, flies blessedly absent. You find an untouched well and whisper thanks as if it's listening. Some believe these abandoned places are spared, not cursed, that death passed over them like fog slipping past a lantern. Others think they're frozen in plague time, ticking toward decay. One shaman circles a vanished village 3 times before declaring it paused. Nobody challenges the terminology. You ride past a field where arrows form spirals in the dirt. Whether ritual or panic, it unsettles you. Later, in camp, a girl sings a lullaby she claims she heard from an empty house. It's eerie, too slow, each note stretched like a held breath. You hum it without realizing. As night falls, the nobles argue about maps, whether they should mark vanished villages or leave them blank as warnings. Someone draws tiny skulls on parchment corners. Another sketches only trees, saying roots remember. You sleep uneasy, dreaming of shoes that walk without feet and doors that lock themselves. The wind outside no longer sounds like wind. It sounds like listening. You begin ascending, not out of ambition but desperation, winding through pine-dense ridges that feel older than memory. The nobles say the mountains are sacred, that their altitudes press down sickness like parchment beneath a stone. Your breath thins as the caravan climbs higher, horses sweating and wheezing in rhythms that sound like broken lullabies. One noble begins humming, insisting the tune opens the chest chakras. You nod, mostly to conserve energy. Camps scatter across slopes, yurts arranged like chess pieces seeking the protection of clouds. The Khan's decree now encourages elevation rise above the breath of plague. No one argues. The logic is poetic, if unproven. Historians still debate whether the Mongol elite believed mountain air truly repelled the Black Death or simply offered a comforting illusion. Either way, snow-dusted rock now becomes your sanctuary. You unpack your tent beside a stream that babbles like forgotten gossip. A boy ties goat hair charms to tree trunks, claiming spirits can't climb. His uncle carves sacred symbols into stones, stacking them into towers meant to catch plague winds. You notice these towers begin appearing at every campsite, becoming almost mandatory. Smoke rises from herbs burnt in brass bowls: sage, mugwort, pine needles mixed into aromatic cocktails for protection. Your sinuses feel assaulted, but your heart feels slightly calmer. Someone offers you juniper root to chew, it tastes like bitterness and bedtime stories. One noble declares that snow itself cleanses disease, and begins rubbing his forehead with ice until his eyebrows freeze. You gently suggest moderation. A shaman tells the group that mountain spirits prefer silence and gifts. Soon, nobles place offerings, bits of ribbon, fruit slices, polished stones, even poems written in ash. One lord kneels and whispers apologies to the wind. You catch fragments, "We feared too loudly." That night, music wafts through the slopes, soft lyres and throat songs echo between cliffs, melodies designed to calm the lungs. Whether it works or not, the mood eases. You feel your chest loosen. Dreams are gentler too, no wolves or boiling shadows, just slow-motion clouds and forgotten kisses. You wake to frost coating your boots and a story that someone saw footprints in the sky. Not birds. Not clouds. Just footprints. No one asks questions, but many begin praying harder. That evening, one noble insists eating dried moss improves blood flow. You nibble some and feel precisely nothing. Still, a young girl hands you a bracelet made of crow feathers and ice pearls. "It keeps the mountain happy," she says. You wear it without argument. Someone builds a snow statue shaped like a tent with wings. They call it the Sky Dweller and bow before it each morning. A general now decrees all battle plans be postponed until the mountain speaks. No one laughs. You begin noticing how even breath feels different here, less heavy, less haunted. But at dinner, someone coughs. Not loudly. Just once. You feel the slope tilt inside your chest. Later, a noble packs his tent and moves another 100 paces uphill, muttering that the altitude wasn't quite right. You follow. Just in case. You shuffle into a steamy canvas structure stitched with care and prayer, a bathhouse on the move, erected beside a babbling creek and surrounded by guards with blessed arrows in their belts. Inside, nobles lounge in robes damp with sweat and ritual oil, murmuring complaints about boils that bloom like evil roses. One aristocrat lifts his sleeve to reveal a pink lump the size of a pigeon egg, claiming it's just a heat rash while everyone else inches away. The steam smells of mint, goat tallow, and something earthy that might be fermented mushroom. A healer ladles warm water over your shoulders while muttering a chant that sounds like float the fever down the spine. You breathe deeply, both comforted and mildly alarmed. Bathhouses like these are the new temples of immunity, scrubbing off curse residue, dream dust, and what one noble calls spirit crumbs. Historians still argue whether these portable spas served any medical function or simply distracted the nobility with luxury and pseudoscience, but you have to admit, your pores feel pleasantly terrified. A shaman offers a salt rub infused with eagle sweat, don't ask, and insists it rebalances your aura. You decline politely and opt for a poultice made from boiled juniper and crushed beetle wings. It smells awful but tingles in a promising way. In one corner, a noble boils silver coins in a clay pot filled with creek water, dabbing the metallic broth onto her cheeks with solemn precision. To reflect disease, she says. You try a splash and immediately regret it. Another whispers that bathing under moonlight erases inner rot. Tonight's moon is a sliver, maybe it only erases ankle rot. You sit in a tub while someone reads prayers backwards, their voice echoing against the canvas like a haunted lullaby. One child refuses to bathe until every corner of the tent has been blessed with marmot scent. His mother obliges, though reluctantly. A servant walks past rubbing sand into his knees, insisting it absorbs invisible spirits. You glance down and wonder if your own legs have become too visible. Later, a noble starts reciting boil lore, tales of ancestors whose spots wept songs and dissolved illness through melody. You can't verify any of this, but it sounds poetic enough to try humming. A woman nearby dips her fingers in ash water and paints symbols on her thighs. It keeps the boils humble, she says. You nod, unsure what arrogance looks like in skin lumps. Someone swears that eating fermented scorpion tails staves off redness. You pretend to consider it, then eat a bland rice dumpling instead. Around midnight, the bathhouse air becomes thick with incantations, steam, and uncertainty. Nobles lean against cushions embroidered with plague-resistant patterns interlocking skulls and stars. A scholar passes out scrolls showing drawings of ulcers in 12 styles, annotated with rhymes. You copy one into your sleeve just in case. One young noble declares her boil shaped like a phoenix feather and vows not to treat it, calling it divine. A healer sighs and walks away. The steaming air feels heavy with half-truths and whispered hope. You dry off beside a brazier full of scented ash and place your hand above it, waiting for some kind of sign. It crackles once, then settles. You tell yourself that means you're safe for tonight. You're roused by a storm that never fully arrives, just wind scraping against silk tent flaps and the low moan of a horse, one of the emperor's prize stallions, no less, its breath ragged, its eyes rimmed with panic. Nobles rush toward the enclosure, half-clothed in ceremonial robes and sleep-crumpled hats, whispering healing chants into the air as if words could rewind the creature's lungs. The horse stumbles, legs tremble like reeds, and collapses against embroidered cushions meant for napping, not dying. You stand frozen as the imperial groom dabs the stallion's gums with honey and salt water, whispering a lullaby meant for foals. The beast doesn't respond. By sunrise, its flank stops twitching. Grief swells through the camp like spoiled wind. Mongol nobles treat their horses with reverence, somewhere between worship and kinship. This isn't just a death, it's a curse delivered directly to the throne's stable. A shaman weeps and declares the stallion's spirit trapped unless properly guided. He demands a procession, smoke rituals, and a stuffed fox sacrificed to carry the sorrow uphill. Historians still argue whether the death of royal horses triggered formal policy shifts during the plague years or merely intensified emotional panic, but this particular loss changes things. The emperor, cloistered in his mountain yurt, sends out a decree: all sick animals must be isolated, all ceremonial steeds re-blessed, and all caretakers retrained in plague lore. You overhear one stable master blaming cold moons and another swearing the horse had nightmares it couldn't escape. Some nobles believe the stallion's death signifies a breach in protection, a cracked barrier between sickness and nobility. One prince begins wearing 3 horsehair bracelets, claiming it binds his breath to healthy steeds. You're handed one too, it's itchy but comforting. That afternoon, guards scour the camp, inspecting hooves and saddle blankets for signs of spirit invasion. One foal sneezes and is quarantined in a tent lined with garlic and sand. You visit and hear it snore like a snare drum wrapped in wool. A cook prepares soup in its honor, stirring in mare's milk and dried tarragon. No one eats it, but the pot simmers all day like an open wound. Later, nobles host a morning banquet not for people, but for horses. Guests dress in gray, feathers tucked behind their ears, and speak only in metaphors. You overhear: the moon lost its rider, and hoofbeats now echo without purpose. Someone plays a mournful tune on a bone flute shaped like a stirrup. A young lord draws horse shapes in ash, tears leaving streaks like racing shadows. That night, sleep feels heavier. Even your dreams trot slowly. You wake drenched in sweat, unsure whether the heat clings from the blankets or from a dream that felt far too vivid. Inside your silk tent, shadows flicker like whispered secrets. Nobles are murmuring again, this time about visions, fevered dreams that dance like omen-laced theater across sleep-starved minds. One aristocrat claims to have seen rivers walking uphill, another swears she glimpsed her own funeral attended by talking crows. No one laughs anymore. Delirium swirls through the camp, subtle as incense and twice as unnerving. You sip tea brewed with pine resin and black seeds shaped like tiny eyes, meant to guard against madness, but the warmth does little to hush your thoughts. A shaman arrives and distributes pouches of dream-dampening powder, which smells suspiciously like burnt mushrooms and despair. You're told to scatter it beneath your pillow and hum while lying down. You try. The hum feels fake, but sleep still comes. In that haze, your mind twists: your cousin's face becomes a horse hoof, your blanket becomes a scroll warning of future famines. You wake suddenly and forget your name for a full minute. Historians still argue whether these visions were symptoms of the plague itself or the result of herbal overdoses used in pursuit of immunity. You glance at your pouch. It's half empty. Rumors spread that one noble predicted her own fever 3 nights before it struck. Another told a poem so haunting, listeners began coughing halfway through. Some call it prophetic sickness, others say it's just too much onion tea. Either way, you watch a noble drape his tent in reflective cloth to bounce hallucinations away. That same cloth later flutters oddly despite no wind. No one questions it. Another noble begins sketching his dreams in charcoal, lining the tent floor with haunting images: winged knives, crying lakes, forests with spines. You step carefully. One elder believes dreams now carry weight, like memory trying to push its way into physical space. He gathers the fevered and holds dream recounting ceremonies, softly spoken circles by moonlight where nightmares are treated like news reports. One woman whispers about swimming through black feathers to reach her mother's voice. She can't recall her mother's name but swears the dream was real. A healer insists dreams must be exhaled before morning, so nobles now sit outside at sunrise, breathing slowly through long cloths held by servants. It's unclear if this helps. Still, you participate. A general starts wearing a blindfold while sleeping, claiming dreams respect modesty. His tent is eerily silent now. That evening, one noble coughs mid-sentence, eyes wild, then recites a prophecy in 3 languages. You write it down but the ink smears and the words vanish by morning. You begin carrying a pouch of sand to anchor your mind. It's just sand, but you feel slightly steadier. That night, your tent smells of herbs and worry. You sleep with your fingers tucked beneath your pillow, hoping that whatever dreams arrive, they don't bring plague along. You wake to the sound of wheels creaking, not in unison but scattered, uneven, a handful of lesser nobles quietly slipping away before dawn. No formal announcements, no ceremonial exits, just footprints fading between dew-stained grass and the distant murmur of recited excuses. They leave behind half-folded yurts, forgotten cloaks, and servants who pretend not to know where the masters have gone. You step outside, feel the emptiness where laughter used to live, and know what it means: rebellion, not of swords and banners, but of quiet defiance. Mongol hierarchy thrives on order, and these small departures crack that order like a split drum. Historians still argue whether such desertions were tolerated out of sympathy or punished through silence, but in the fever-thin air of this camp, everyone knows escaping without permission risks more than plague. It stains the soul. One noble shrugs as he loads his cart, claiming elevation doesn't work, prayers don't stick, and boiled elk isn't curing anything. You almost follow him. A girl nearby grips a doll made from feathers and wool, staring at the trail like it might pull her family back. Her father coughs softly into his sleeve and pretends he doesn't. In the mess tent, the mood shifts, stews simmer with fewer herbs, laughter shrinks into background noise, and every bowl passed around feels more like a question than a meal. You sit beside a servant now masterless, sipping sour tea and pretending it warms you. Around noon, a courier arrives with news that one noble rebranded himself as a traveling monk, his yurt traded for a bell and a sermon. Another reportedly disguised his horse and rode west dressed as a trader of fermented butter. You imagine the butter leaking secrets one gurgle at a time. Later, a general inspects the remaining tents with the facial expression of someone trying not to inhale disappointment. He posts a new decree: permits now required to breathe near fire. That's the rumor anyway. You help a friend roll her tent tighter, worried the gaps invite spirits. She whispers that spirits follow empty spots. You whisper back that spirits love symmetry and start straightening cups. That night, the music sounds different, less rhythm, more ritual. A boy drums with fingers instead of sticks, calling it stealth percussion. Someone croons in a language no one recognizes. Maybe it's invented just for tonight. Outside, the stars seem fewer, or maybe your eyes blur from fatigue. You walk past a yurt that smells of escape plans. Inside, a noble writes letters to nobody. You read one upside down: I never feared death, only delay. You stop reading. In a far corner, a woman folds her map 3 times, hides it in a loaf of bread, then eats around it slowly. You wonder if cartography by digestion works. She's convinced it does. Eventually, a new kind of silence takes hold, not the hush of sleep but the hollow calm of things missing and nobody naming them. You lie down and dream of tents walking on their own, seeking gentler hills. You ride toward a lake whose surface refuses to stay silent. Locals call it the Screaming Lake, though nobody agrees why. Some say the wind howls through the reeds in cursed octaves, others insist the waters cry whenever bodies are dumped near its shore. You arrive at dusk, horses uneasy, hooves twitching on mossy ground, and notice nobles exchanging nervous glances. The lake itself shimmers with a cold glow, as if it remembers things you'd rather forget. A servant whispers that last week, a bundle was lowered into its depths, wrapped in silver cloth and rosemary twine. Now the birds won't land near the water. You dismount and feel the chill prick at your skin, not from temperature but from stories. One noble swears he heard the lake moan when he passed by alone, another claims a ghost kissed his horse's flank and left an ice mark. You feel skeptical until the mist thickens and you hear something, a sound like wind grinding teeth. A shaman approaches, draped in garlands of dried fish bones, chanting about spirits trapped in ripples. He throws salt onto the lake's edge and it hisses. Historians still argue whether lakes like this were genuinely feared or simply collected stories like wet parchment, but you can't deny the unease swimming through everyone's eyes. That evening, nobles hold a small ritual, whispering names into cups of lake water and pouring them back slowly. One lord insists this confuses death. A scholar proposes the lake is actually soothing, that the howls are wind against reeds shaped like flutes. He plays one to prove the point, it shrieks louder. Nobles begin using the lake to test items for plague touch, drop a spoon, wait for silence. One crashed and the lake echoed with something like regret. You drop a button, no sound. You pocket it again just to be safe. Later, someone claims they saw bubbles forming faces in the lake, one smiling, one frowning. You stare at the water long enough to see shapes but don't trust your own eyes. Nearby, a noble dips his boots and swears his dreams that night were plague-free. You consider dunking your sleeves, then think better of it. A cook tosses leftover broth into the shallows and the lake lets out a low rumble. A child asks if that means the soup was cursed. His uncle answers, only if it tasted bland. Someone starts mapping the lake's reactions, trying different objects: horns, feathers, boiled eggs. One egg floats then spins. You watch in dread as the lake softly laps it ashore. That night, the nobles light fires farther from the water. No one sleeps well. You lie awake, ears straining for the lake's next story. Whatever truth bubbles beneath the surface remains slippery, loud, and all too alive. You arrive at a makeshift dining circle tucked between tall pines and flapping tents, where the mood is less festive and more experimental. Meals no longer serve pleasure but promise each bite loaded with superstition and medicinal hope. Nobles sip bowls of fermented mare's milk with solemn nods, praising its ability to bind the lungs to the ancestors. You take a sip. It tastes like sour memory and grass that's been crying. Someone passes you blood soup, hot, dark, swirling with clumps of something you hope was cooked. It awakens your spirit, wolves, says the server, a noble with turmeric smeared across his forehead. You eat it anyway. The flavors hit like hoofbeats, fast and confusing. One aristocrat bites into garlic clusters wrapped in deer fat, chewing slowly, eyes closed like he's seeing ancient visions. You hear murmurs about the newest health craze: boiled scorpion in pine broth. You pretend to consider it but veer toward a dumpling stuffed with steamed herbs. The girl next to you dips hers in vinegar and prays after swallowing. At the far end of the circle, a healer distributes immunity kits: small bundles of moss, pickled onions, and dried bat wings. He explains the moss absorbs plague breath and the bat wings flap away bad dreams. You take one, obviously. Historians still argue whether Mongol nobles truly believed that diet shaped resistance or if these rituals were simply edible coping mechanisms wrapped in folklore. Either way, tonight's menu reads like a scavenger hunt through anxiety. You watch one boy chase a locust into a bowl of yogurt. High protein, he grins. Nobody corrects him. Nearby, a noble eats only white foods: rice, salt, boiled chicken, claiming color confuses his spirit alignment. His cousin chews charcoal instead and insists black food binds out bad omens. You wonder whether gray dishes cancel themselves out. There's talk of a traveling monk who survived 3 fevers by drinking ash water every morning and avoiding anything sweet. So now sugar becomes a social threat. The dessert table stands abandoned, except for 2 brave souls spooning honey like it's a dare. One lord designs a food ritual involving clockwise chewing and candlelight. You try it. It mostly makes you dizzy. That evening, someone recites a legend about a warrior who fought plague with nothing but boiled mushrooms and lion-shaped spoons. Everyone laughs nervously and hides their wooden cutlery. The cook unveils the anti-boil stew, brewed for 7 hours over fire fed only cedar branches. It smells like sharp promises and regret. You taste it, it burns in places you didn't know could taste. You're told that's good. In your tent, you find a pouch of dried berries with a note, eat before dreams. Protect the breath. You eat two and pretend to feel stronger. You sleep with half a dumpling under your pillow. Not for hunger, but just in case food really does keep nightmares at bay. You wake to the clatter of hoofbeats, not from messengers or deserters but from clerics riding in, each clothed in fabrics embroidered with sigils, prayers stitched between seams and across brows, their voices louder than thunder, their eyes far too quiet. Nobles gather quickly, robes still wrinkled from sleep, as if hoping divine geometry can rewrite biology. The clerics dismount, some in pairs, some alone, each representing different faiths, theories, and therapies. One arrives with a bundle of scrolls and a staff carved from apricot wood, claiming the plague is punishment for unbalanced ancestors. Another recites verses claiming death is a cleansing wind sent to simplify the world. You sip pine bark tea and try to listen without choking. Each cleric offers a different ritual: moon salt bathing, star-matched prayers, fasting on odd-numbered days. A noble nearby mutters that if he followed all instructions, he'd evaporate by Tuesday. Historians still argue whether religious interventions during plague years genuinely aided Mongol society or simply provided structure amid chaos, but faith floods this camp like steam from boiling rivers. One shaman clashes with a foreign priest over funeral chants, their debate sounding more like opera than theology. A monk builds a shrine out of yak bones and lavender twigs, declaring it a spirit-neutral zone. You kneel near it just in case neutrality works. Over by the mess tent, a cleric begins distributing protective verses etched onto thin silver foil, designed to be folded and swallowed. You watch a noble chew one, his lips glittering with sanctified nausea. He burps and declares his stomach absolved. Another offers holy steam therapy, creating portable saunas where sacred herbs are boiled while hymns are recited. You enter one and feel briefly blessed and slightly scalded. Outside, nobles debate whether different religions offer plague-specific immunity. A scholar proposes combining chants, one for the lungs, another for dreams, and a third for fingernails. Someone scribbles a new prayer onto a gourd and hangs it on a horse's neck. Double protection, he grins. A cleric draws a symbol in ash and instructs nobles to walk through it backwards. You try but trip slightly. Everyone agrees that counts. That night, a ceremony begins, tents lit with yellow candles, nobles circling a brazier while repeating ancestral names in whisper echo. One cleric insists all fire must speak tonight. You stare at the flames. They remain frustratingly mute. Still, you feel something shift. Even if the plague marches forward, belief becomes armor stitched with hope and ritual. You sleep beside a scroll with verses about clouds learning to cry, half poetry, half prophecy, and just enough to cradle your breath till morning. You wake to soft celebration echoing through the slopes, nobles smiling as though the plague had surrendered overnight. Whispers fill the air: someone survived. Not just survived but thrived. A noble woman who'd been coughing for 6 days straight now walks with a spring in her step, her boils faded to pale freckles. She is chosen, a shaman proclaims, and suddenly her tent is lined with feathers, incense, and coins placed in patterns resembling constellations. You approach, curious but cautious, and hear her reciting poetry backward while sipping honey broth. One noble swears her recovery proves divine favor. Another starts sketching symbols she touched while sick, hoping to bottle holiness. Historians still argue whether Mongol elites viewed survivors as blessed or dangerously tempting fate, but in this moment, she's untouchable. Then her voice cracks. A tiny cough. Not dramatic, not loud, just enough to scrape the optimism off every sunrise-colored robe. The celebration shrinks into whispers, the feathers fall from her tent edge, and someone quietly removes the coins. You pass a guard folding up a prayer banner with practiced melancholy. The noblewoman rests again, murmuring something about snow tasting like silence. A healer arrives, too late to save the mood, offering fermented garlic oil and instructions for reverse breathing. You try it later and feel like you're swallowing your own shadow. A young boy draws her tent in ash, then erases it with his sleeve. She was light, he says, and you can't tell if it's prophecy or grief. Some nobles now hesitate to speak of their own health, better to remain questionable than rise and fall. A prince claims he recovered, but keeps pretending to limp just in case. You share tea with someone who swears his fever gave him visions of flying goats dispensing advice about regret. You stir honey into your cup and nod solemnly. One cleric preaches that illness reshapes truth, that surviving doesn't mean winning, just passing through an unfamiliar doorway. You help set up a tent for another noble showing signs of recovery, though everyone insists it's just heat exhaustion. Still, the cook makes celebration dumplings, dipped in plum sauce and hope. You eat too, then hear someone vomiting behind a shrub. The party fizzles quietly. That night, a storyteller recites a tale about a man who beat death by confusing it with kindness. Everyone listens, nobody claps. You lie in bed counting your breaths, wondering if hope can be contagious without the cough. You wake to scribbles and scrolls strewn across the breakfast mats, lines crossed, names scratched, and succession plans rewritten in the margins of stained parchment. Nobles sit in tight circles arguing about inheritance, not out of greed but urgency. The plague doesn't care for protocol, and dynasties now hinge on who's still breathing. One lord tears up his family tree, proclaiming, "Roots are rotten. Let branches choose themselves." You drink tea brewed with beetle husks and hear whispers about new laws, land passing to whoever survives longest, titles claimed through dreaming contests, a marriage arranged solely to seal a fortune from ghostly seizure. A noblewoman redraws her will 3 times before lunch, each version naming a different cousin, pet, and traveling shaman. Historians still argue whether these adjustments preserved order or accelerated chaos, but every inkstroke feels like an attempt to outmaneuver death's dice roll. You peek over a noble's shoulder and see a new clause: if all heirs perish, the fortune defaults to the river. She's serious. One prince declares that blood matters less than breath now. His brother sneezes and gets cut from the inheritance list. Some nobles begin offering survival gifts, bribes in the form of fermented plum cake and handwritten affirmations. A man gives his sister a saddle carved from cedar, claiming it ensures loyalty. She accepts it and redraws her legacy map using goat milk ink. Clerics get involved too, reading omens from burned contract corners and suggesting that scrolls with triangles grant more immunity than those with circles. You try folding your own document and end up with a shape that resembles a regretful bird. That evening, a council gathers not to govern but to declare who qualifies as plague-proof. Turns out, 3 nobles qualify based on diet, 2 on dreams, and 1 because he's allergic to garlic and hasn't gotten sick. Nobody argues fear shapes logic now. A child inherits an orchard because she kissed a fox without coughing. A servant inherits a library because he whistles songs that make boils retreat. You're asked what you'd leave behind if tomorrow erased your breath. You joke about giving away your boots. Someone writes it down. That night, the stars blink slowly and the wills grow thicker than blankets. One noble sleeps beside her scroll, hand resting on the words just in case. You close your tent and wonder if intentions can survive better than bodies. You hear it before you see it, a thread of melody weaving through pine smoke and murmured dread. Nobles gather in small knots, eyes soft and distant, humming tunes from better years. The air bends around the music, like it's shielding everyone from coughs and fevered thoughts. One noble plucks a lyre with fingers wrapped in silk, each note blooming into echoes shaped like memory. The song is old, originally a lullaby about moonlight on horses' manes, but the verses now sound like mourning. You sit nearby, tracing spirals in the dust as someone joins in with a flute carved from crow bones. It whines, gently, respectfully. Around you, people sway, not dancing, exactly, but aligning breath to melody. A child wraps herself in a blanket adorned with stitched stars and whispers the song backwards, claiming it confuses sad spirits. You think she might be right. A scholar proposes that music is the language plague doesn't speak. Historians still argue whether Mongol nobles used song as resistance or remedy, but here it's clearly ritual notes stretched across grief to cover the tears like warm fabric. One noble chants low phrases designed to wrap the lungs in rhythm, while another swears singing while standing on soft earth cures dizziness. You try it. You feel less dizzy, but mostly because the ground feels real beneath your boots. A traveling bard begins a melody with no words, just vowels and breath, drawing sounds from the air itself. Someone adds harmonies shaped like sighs. You join briefly, unsure of your voice but knowing silence feels less safe. Later, people gather with carved flutes, goat-skin drums, and dried gourd rattles, forming an orchestra of resilience. One noble gently taps a spoon against a teacup in time with the beat, calling it grief percussion. A tale circulates about a clan that beat back sickness using only lullabies sung in pairs under snowlight. You don't question it. The nobles now sing to the sick, songs that describe fields blooming in impossible seasons and horses leaping over sorrow. One patient hears a tune and smiles despite the fever proof, someone says, that melody travels faster than plague. That night, you hum softly in your tent, hoping the notes reach somewhere kind. In your sleep, rhythms carry you across warm grass toward a horizon that never coughs. You wake beneath bruised skies and the silence that usually follows cancellation, not of plays or festivals, but of war. Nobles sit around scorched maps with eyes dulled by uncertainty. The inked battle plans that once sliced across rivers and borders now seem irrelevant. Generals frown not because tactics have failed, but because their soldiers have. One leader coughs mid-strategy and everyone shifts quietly away. War can't march on purple tongues and trembling knees. You hear someone joke that horses now outrun battles instead of riding into them. No one laughs. Messages arrive from the outer camps, campaigns postponed, enemies evaporated not by conquest but contagion. Historians still argue whether the plague halted Mongol military expansion more than strategic failure, but in this moment, strategy looks like spilled tea. A noble throws a spear at a tree just to feel something move fast. It thuds awkwardly. Nearby, a map burns in a slow circle, as if land itself disapproves of movement. A messenger announces a target city has already emptied itself. Plague arrived before arrows did. You sip broth tasting like indecision while riders pack their gear with no direction. War drums rest against cushions embroidered with foxes and fate. One noble asks if the sound of battle feels less necessary now. Another says silence wins too. A general flips his helmet upside down and fills it with garlic. He calls it his new strategy. Someone paints ravens across old campaign scrolls, replacing cities with feathers and borders with branches. At dusk, two nobles duel over inheritance rights instead of territory. Their blades move slow, more like choreography than conflict. One pauses to cough, the match ends. Tents once reserved for war councils now host poetry readings, verses about breath and blame and waiting. You listen, half-hearted, fingers tracing map folds. Some say conflict has mutated not against kingdoms but fever and breath. A healer proposes declaring war on despair. Nobles raise cups of boiled pine bark in solemn agreement. That night, you dream of battlefields covered in moss and soldiers dancing instead of dying. You wake unsure whether to sharpen your blade or your understanding of stillness. You drift through the outer rings of the noble encampment, where tents are quieter, shadows deeper, and scouts whisper like cautious ghosts. Surveillance on the steppe becomes sacred duty, watching not just for enemies or traitors but for plague winds, breath-borne curses carried by invisible spirits that don't respect borders. Riders are dispatched in pairs, one to observe, one to hum protective chants. Each returns with sketches, wind patterns resembling coils, leaf scatter shaped like warnings, dust swirls that allegedly spell danger. A noble unfurls a map scrawled with wind diagrams and cough reports, connecting them with red twine. Historians still argue whether these plague vectors were superstition dressed as science or the earliest epidemiology attempts. Either way, the nobles take them seriously. You pass a man installing mirrored screens around his yurt, saying reflection confuses illness. His cousin wears blinders on her sleeves, which is questionable tailoring but impressive commitment. Clerics teach secret hand signals meant to repel breath demons. You learn 4, forget 2, and feel half safe. A young boy collects beetles and releases them in wind tunnels. If they crawl south, the camp moves north. Scouts now track whispers, not hoofprints. You overhear a rider describe air thicker than sorrow near a grove. Another reports feeling a tug on his tongue when passing a ridge. You sip barley tea laced with sage and worry, wondering if your own tongue's tugging feels more metaphorical. At the command tent, nobles argue about surveillance zones. Some recommend altitude shifts. Others want to follow migrating birds. A scout recommends watching for coughing crows. You don't ask how he distinguishes those from regular ones. A cart arrives bearing wind-warding fabrics, long silk strips dyed in ash and honey, meant to flap away infection. You tie one to your belt. It catches wind like hope. A physician draws spirals with charcoal, explaining they match recent fever trails. You trace them with your finger, feeling like you're learning a new language taught by whispers. A legend emerges about a scout who saw plague shadows fighting in the clouds. He drew their shapes and later recovered from illness unscathed. His drawings are now copied by every noble hoping for protection. One noble attaches feather bundles to her tent posts, believing they snag bad wind. The feathers sway erratically, unsettling but stylish. That night, you sleep beside a breath map, with contours of recent coughs forming mountains of concern. Wind shivers your tent fabric once, then settles. You exhale slowly and remind yourself the breeze has no teeth, at least not tonight. You smell smoke before you see the banquet, rich, spiced, strangely somber. A feast is underway, but no one smiles the way they used to. Nobles sit cross-legged on rugs embroidered with animals that no longer symbolize strength but remembrance. Bowls overflow with fermented mare's milk, ladled cautiously like holy water, while lamb stews bubble beside trays of dried fruits arranged in the shapes of eclipses and wounds. This isn't celebration, it's a farewell party disguised as a supper. One noble raises a cup in silence, and others follow, the toast suspended in air heavier than breath. You sip from yours and taste bitter resilience. A scroll is passed around, filled with names of those who vanished without ritual. Everyone adds a word, some write poems, others sketches, one simply adds a small leaf and presses it into the parchment. The Khan's envoy offers a speech, something about courage beneath clouds, but the words crumble in midair like dry bread. Historians still argue whether these final feasts were formal affairs or simply collective coping masquerading as etiquette, but tonight feels rehearsed, like the nobles knew this page was coming. Someone places a feathered headdress on an empty pillow and whispers, "He would have made the joke about pine sauce." You don't ask who. Musicians play slowly, flute, lyre, throat singing but with tone stretched and hesitant, as if fearing the spirits might hum along. One servant dances, a solo in the flickering firelight, spinning with closed eyes and ash-stained sleeves. You feel something catch in your chest and decide not to name it. Near the tents, Healers paint symbols on cutlery, saying food must now be eaten under spiritual disguise. You stir your bowl and pretend not to notice the clove floating like an omen. Conversation meanders into memory. A noble retells the story of a horse that outran lightning, another recalls the time someone swam across a pond for pickled duck eggs. Laughter ripples brief, cautious, but real. Later, toasts turn into tiny eulogies. One boy recites the names of his cousins like counting stars, ending with "and the quiet one whose dreams smelled like mint." Nobles begin lighting small lanterns, sending them across the field in gentle clusters. You follow with your own carved from bark and thread and watch as it lifts, trembling toward the haze. No declarations, no blessings. Just a slow float into the unknown. You remain at the table long after the plates cool, sitting beside a half-eaten pear and the echo of a joke you almost remember. Tomorrow, some will leave. Tonight, the air clings to every breath like a listener not ready to let go. You trudge along a path so cold it crunches like brittle glass beneath the horse's hooves. The caravan winds through frozen passes, the trail marked not by flags or milestones but by scattered remnants, abandoned wealth, overturned carts, and once prized relics left to frostbite and memory. A gilded mirror lies half buried in snow, reflecting nothing but gray sky and regret. Nobles ride silent, their cloaks stiff with frost, eyes fixed on whatever lies ahead or doesn't. One lord dismounts, squats beside a pile of coins spilled beside a broken wagon, then walks on without touching them. Gold isn't worth breath. You pass a fur-lined trunk split open inside, silks folded like forgotten lullabies. A noble nearby mutters, she was saving those for spring, but no one asks who. Traders speak of a trail called the Ice Thread, a route thick with luxury gone limp, where horses die mid-step and jewels glint like warnings. Historians later describe it as migration or evacuation, but tonight it feels like surrender wrapped in velvet. One noble ties a rope from her saddle to her child's, worried footsteps might disappear in snowdrift. You feel your own mount tremble beneath you, fatigue or frostbite, unclear. A cook roasts turnips beside a fire built from broken crates and torn maps. You ask why the maps. He says, nobody's following them anymore. Behind you, a caravan wheel cracks, splinters scatter like last-minute confessions. Nobles don't even turn around. A boy drops a copper ring into a puddle of slush and says, it'll find its own finger someday. You hand him a warmer scarf and say nothing. Someone lights incense mid-ride, not for prayer but because the scent makes the cold feel less sharp. A rider hums softly, the melody limp, slow, half dirge, half lullaby. You hum back. The ice catches your breath and holds it. You hear a horse fall behind you. No one stops. Later, a merchant offers firewood carved into bird shapes. Hope burns differently, he claims. You buy one. It smells like cedar and closure. That night, tents barely rise from frost-bitten soil. You sleep beside 2 coins you didn't mean to pick up, wrapped in cloth and tucked into your boot. If someone asks, you'll say they're memories. If no one asks, maybe they'll stay just warmth. Tomorrow, the trail stretches farther, silver footprints ahead, and behind, the hush of everything you didn't carry. You wake to a breeze so gentle it feels more like suggestion than wind. The nobles don't speak much anymore, not from fear but fatigue. Words have begun to mean less in a world shaped by breath and silence. Tents flutter with fewer charms, fires burn lower, meals simplify into boiled grain and water kissed with ash. You wander through camp and notice how every yurt seems to tilt slightly, like they're bowing to the horizon. A shaman ties feathers to a crooked branch and calls it the goodbye tree. You watch, unsure whether it's meant to honor the lost or persuade the living to keep holding on. A noble sews a new robe using thread made from prayer scrolls. He says it feels lighter on the shoulders. Historians will call this the era of ritual fatigue, when magic became muted not because belief faded, but because breath was rationed. At midday, a messenger arrives wrapped in silence, hands trembling, scroll unopened. No one asks what it says. Instead, someone hands him soup and folds the parchment without reading. Information no longer outruns emotion. In the distance, a child plays with stones, arranging them into rings, then stepping through as if crossing thresholds only she understands. You join her briefly, stepping inside a ring and pretending your shadow belongs to a future version of yourself untouched by illness. At sunset, nobles gather for a non-ceremony, no drums, no chants, just everyone standing near each other, hands on hearts, blinking toward whatever twilight offers. A woman places salt at the corners of her tent, not to ward off spirits but to remember flavor. Nearby, someone etches names into frost. They melt before being finished. You hear a rider approach, then hesitate, then leave again without saying anything. That evening, your dreams arrive quietly. No plague. No spirits. Just a field of soft-footed animals and a river that hums lullabies. You wake at dawn, stretch without fear, and feel your breath meet the air without argument. The plague still lurks, but this morning, the wind feels forgiving. You ride beneath a sky stitched with quiet, the clouds soft as forgotten promises and the horizon stretching like a breath held too long. The caravan has thinned not from departure but from diffusion. Nobles scatter with purposeful ambiguity, some heading toward familiar cities with new rules, others veering into forests rumored to be plague-free. A tent flaps empty near a pine grove, its incense burner still warm and humming faintly like it remembers someone. You dismount and find a note tucked under a bowl of ashes, "Don't wait for me. I'm already where I was meant to be." You don't recognize the handwriting but the sentiment lands heavy. Nearby, a noble plants lavender roots into a patch of scorched soil, whispering about grounding grief. Her cousin lines small stones around their yurt, not for protection, just for symmetry. You help rearrange them. The rituals aren't grand anymore. Now, it's the mundane acts: folding blankets slowly, seasoning stew with care, listening to wind patterns that carry weight. Historians will one day call this a cultural pivot, where survival bred gentleness in tradition. You just call it necessary. One noble draws breathing maps, simple sketches showing how and where breath returns untroubled. Yours lands on a cliff edge with a view of cranes rising. A child gifts you a charm, a hollow bone stuffed with dried mint and stitched shut with river thread. "For remembering without weight," she says. You accept and wear it around your wrist. That evening, the camp becomes mosaic tents shaped like music pauses, horses resting like folded intentions, and people quietly testing tomorrow. Someone sings while cleaning saddle buckles. Another sews feathers into the hem of a travel robe. No one writes decrees anymore. The new rules are unwritten and felt. As you lie down, your blanket smells faintly of cedar and possibility. You dream not of plague or running but of arrival. Of warmth waiting somewhere gently. Of breath that hums in harmony with wind. It curls soft around the dwindling camp, wrapping what remains in mist and memory. Tents sleep like folded wings, and the firelight flickers without urgency, reflecting in bowls of cooling grain and unsipped mare's milk. There are fewer words now, fewer reasons to fill silence with sound. Each noble moves slower not from weakness, but reverence for the stillness that follows survival. A scout traces lines in the dirt just for symmetry. A child hums to a charm tucked behind their ear. No one rushes, and no one pretends they weren't changed. Some leave. Some stay. Some plant things not to grow but to honor the soil itself. You walk past a yurt scented with cedar and dried mint and feel something release: tension, expectation, the echo of dread. Somewhere behind you, laughter drifts not loud, not eager, just real. You remember a story not yet told, and for once, it can wait. This isn't the end of the journey, just its quieter turning. A moment of breath after generations of holding it. The plague doesn't vanish. But here, under a sky blinking with possibility, you can exhale without apology. And as your dreams return, they do so with gentleness.